Charlie Munger spent his whole life making people rich, and his most repeated piece of advice was almost blunt enough to be rude. Get your hands on the first $100,000, he said, and after that you can ease off the gas. He was not exaggerating. There is a real line in every person's finances where the market quietly becomes a bigger earner than you are. Once you cross it, the frantic saving that carried you there starts to matter far less than you would ever guess. Here is where that line actually sits in 2026. Here is the strange truth that almost nobody explains out loud. For the first long stretch of your financial life, you are the engine. Every dollar of progress comes from your own two hands. You earn it, you refuse to spend it, and you stack it somewhere it can grow. Your savings rate is the whole story during this phase because your pile is still too small to do much on its own. But money does not stay passive forever. Once your investments grow past a certain size, they start throwing off returns that first rival and then beat the money you can physically set aside each month. That handoff has a name. A lot of people call it the crossover point. And the day you reach it, your money clocks in and starts doing more of the work than you do. Do not misread me here, because that early grind is real and it is not optional. Munger was not being cruel when he called the first 100,000 the hardest part of the whole journey. He was being honest about the arithmetic. When your account holds $10,000, a strong year in the market might hand you $700. That is a decent dinner out, not a life change. At that size, nothing rescues you except your own discipline. You trim what you can, you automate what you save so you never see it, and you keep feeding the account even when it feels like it is barely twitching. This is exactly the phase where most people quit, because the reward feels invisible for years. The ones who push through are not smarter or luckier. They simply stay in the seat long enough for the second phase to arrive. Let me explain why that first 100,000 feels so uniquely brutal, because understanding it is what keeps you in the game. In the beginning, you have nothing working for you. No momentum, no meaningful returns, no snowball, just your paycheck and your willpower against a mountain that never seems to shrink. You might save aggressively for 2 or 3 years and look up to find a balance that a single good week in the market could have produced for a wealthier person. That is demoralizing, and it is supposed to be. The whole reason so few people ever build real wealth is that this opening chapter has almost no visible reward, so they conclude the game is rigged and walk away right before it tips in their favor. The ones who make it are the ones who trust the math even while the results are still hiding. Look at how this plays out for someone real. Priscilla started with nothing but a modest paycheck and a stubborn streak. For her first 3 years, she saved like her life depended on it, packed her lunches, kept an old car running well past its prime, and funneled everything she could into low-cost index funds. At the end of those 3 years, she had around $40,000, and she felt almost cheated, because the market had barely moved the needle compared to her own sweat. What she could not see yet was that she was quietly building the base of the snowball. By her 7th year, she crossed 100,000, and something shifted that she could actually feel. A single average year in the market now added nearly as much as she did. She had spent years shoving a boulder uphill, and it had finally started to roll in the right direction on its own. The reason this trips up so many good people is emotional, not mathematical. Human beings are wired to crave a reward they can see, and compounding hands you almost nothing to look at for a long time. The account creeps up by a few percent, the balance still looks small next to your goals, and your brain starts screaming that this is not working. That feeling is the single most expensive emotion in personal finance because it convinces people to stop right before the curve bends upward. The defense against it is to be boring on purpose. Set your contributions to move automatically on payday before you can talk yourself out of them, and then stop checking the balance obsessively. Let the dull middle years be dull. The people who build serious wealth are rarely the most exciting investors in the room. They are the ones who set up a simple system, refuse to touch it, and let time do the one thing time is good at. So what actually flips at the line? It comes down to two numbers fighting each other. The first number is how much you add every month out of your paycheck. The second is how much your existing money earns entirely on its own. Early on, the first number wins in a landslide because a tiny pile earns almost nothing, and your contributions have a ceiling built into them. You can only save so much of a salary before there is nothing left to cut. Your returns, on the other hand, climb every single year because they are a percentage of a pile that keeps getting bigger. One number stays roughly frozen while the other one keeps rising. Sooner or later, they meet in the middle. And the exact moment your yearly return matches your yearly saving, you have arrived at the line. Think about a snowball for a second, because it is the honest image of what is happening to your money. At the top of the hill, you are packing it by hand, scraping up every bit of snow you can find, and it feels like nothing. The ball is small, the hill is long, and the work is all you. But once it gets big enough and starts to roll, it grabs snow on its own, faster and faster, and your job changes completely. You are no longer building it, you are just steering it and keeping it on the slope. Your money behaves the exact same way. The crossover point is the moment the ball starts rolling downhill faster than you could ever pack it by hand, and if you saw the thumbnail on this video, that rolling snowball of coins is precisely the feeling we are chasing. Watch what that looks like inside a real account as it approaches the line. Imagine you have built your way up to $150,000 invested, and you are still adding $1,000 a month, which is $12,000 across the year. In a normal 7% year, that pile alone earns you around $10,500 without you lifting a finger. Your own contributions that year are $12,000. You are almost even. The money is nearly matching you dollar for dollar. Push that balance up to $170,000 and hold the same habit, and now your returns quietly pass your contributions. From that day forward, in a typical year, your money is the harder worker in the household. You did not get a raise. You did not pick up a second job. The pile simply got big enough to out-earn the person who built it. There is a clean way to find your own number, and you can do it on the back of a receipt tonight. Take the amount you invest across a full year, then divide it by the return you expect to earn. Over the long run, a broadly diversified stock portfolio has returned around 10% a year before inflation, and closer to 7% a year once inflation takes its cut. Use 7 to keep yourself honest. Say you invest $500 a month. That is $6,000 across the year. Divide $6,000 by 7%, and your crossover point lands near $86,000. Bump your habit up to $1,000 a month, and your line moves to around $170,000. Take it to $1,500 a month, and you cross somewhere near $257,000. Notice that saving more actually raises your line, which sounds backward until it clicks. A stronger saving engine simply means your money has to grow a little larger before it can out-earn a bigger version of you. It helps to know which buckets this money can live in, because the tax code in 2026 is quietly on your side. Inside a workplace retirement plan, you can set aside up to $24,500 of your own money this year. On top of that, you can add another $7,500 in an individual retirement account. Every one of those dollars grows without the yearly drag of taxes, which lets your snowball roll a little faster than it would in an ordinary account. And if your employer matches any slice of your contribution, take all of it, because a match is the rare thing in finance that doubles your money the instant it lands before the market even opens. Grady ignored his company match for 6 years because the paperwork felt annoying, and he handed away tens of thousands of dollars in free money that would have compounded for decades. Do not be Grady. Free acceleration toward your line is the easiest yes you will ever say. Now watch Munger's number stop sounding like folklore. Run his old advice through the very same math. If you were earning the market's full 10% and setting aside somewhere around $10,000 a year, your crossover point falls almost exactly at $100,000. That figure was never magic. He did not pull it from the sky to sound wise. It was simply the level where, for a determined saver of his era, the market finally started earning about as much as the person did. He watched it happen inside his own accounts, and he turned it into a dare for everyone younger than him. Everything before that line is you dragging the weight uphill by yourself. Everything after it, the weight begins to roll on its own. Let me put some real long-term numbers on this, because the second phase is genuinely hard to believe until you see it laid out. Take $100,000, add not a single dollar more, and just let it sit at 7%. After 10 years, it grows to almost $197,000. Give it 20 years, and it becomes roughly $387,000. Stretch it to 30 years with zero new money from you, and that same $100,000 turns into about $761,000. At the market's full 10%, that ending figure sails past $1.5 million. Same starting pile, same person, no extra effort at all. The only ingredient added was time. And here is a shortcut worth memorizing called the Rule of 72. Divide 72 by your return, and you get the number of years it takes your money to double. At 7%, your money doubles about every 10 years. At 10%, roughly every 7. That doubling is the engine you cannot grind harder to build. You can only give it more time. One honest warning before we go further, so no one accuses me of selling a fantasy. That 10% figure is an average stretched across nearly a century, and it hides some genuinely ugly years. The market has dropped more than 30% in a single stretch and taken years to crawl back. It does not deliver a smooth 7% every December like clockwork. Some years you will open your account and it will be down, and it will feel like the whole idea was a lie. It is not. The average only shows up for the people who stay in their seat through the bad years long enough to collect the good ones. Fees matter here too. A fund quietly charging you 1% a year may sound harmless, but over decades, it can swallow a shocking chunk of your ending balance, so keep your costs low and your funds simple. The math in this video assumes you are patient and you are not bleeding money to fees. Honor both of those, and the line is very real. If this is already shifting how you look at your own accounts, subscribe and stick around, because the second half is where it gets genuinely freeing. Now let me show you what happens on the far side of that line, because this next part is the piece that surprises almost everyone. Take two people who both hit their number at $200,000 and then live very differently for the next 25 years. Renata keeps her foot flat on the gas. She invests $1,000 a month, every single month, no matter what life throws at her. Terrence eases all the way off. He never adds another dollar and simply lets his $200,000 ride at 7%. 25 years later, Renata sits on roughly $1.8 million. Terrence, who stopped saving entirely, still lands just over $1 million. Now here is the part that stops people cold. Renata poured in $300,000 of her own money over those years, and all of that effort bought her about $750,000 in extra ending wealth. That gap is real, and honestly, it is worth having. But look hard at what carried the load. Terrence saved nothing at all and his pile still grew more than 5 times over purely on returns. Past the line, the market is the senior partner and your contributions are the junior one. I want to be straight with you here, because this is exactly where a lot of finance channels quietly mislead you. Saving more never stops helping. In raw dollars, Renata is clearly better off, and if you can keep feeding your investments, you absolutely should. What changes is not whether saving works. What changes is how much of your growth comes from your effort versus how much comes from time. Early on, almost every dollar of progress is you. Past your number, most of it is the money itself. So grinding twice as hard on your savings rate, cutting your life down to the bone to do it, buys you a smaller and smaller slice of the final result. When you are just starting out, doubling your savings can nearly double your future. Once you are well beyond the line, doubling your savings might lift the ending number by 1/3 or so, while the market handles the larger share without ever asking you for anything. That raises the obvious question. If saving harder matters less once you cross the line, then what matters more? 3 quiet things take over the job. The first is simply not selling. Sabrina spent 15 patient years building a strong portfolio, then watched it drop almost 20% in a rough year and moved everything to cash right at the bottom. She protected herself from a loss that only existed on paper, and by doing so, she turned it into a real one, then missed the recovery that arrived just months later. A single moment of panic undid more than a decade of discipline. The second thing that matters is staying invested through the boredom, because the biggest gains tend to land in a small handful of years you can never predict ahead of time. Sit those few years out on the sidelines, and your whole result quietly collapses. The third thing is keeping your money in something that genuinely compounds. A giant balance sitting in a plain checking account never crosses any line at all, no matter how large it grows. There is a mirror image to all of this that deserves a warning of its own. Compounding does not only work for you, it works just as hard against you when you carry high-interest debt. A credit card charging above 20% is a snowball rolling in the wrong direction, growing faster than almost any investment ever could. You cannot outinvest a balance like that, so before you obsess over reaching your crossover point, wipe out any debt charging you double-digit interest first. Clearing it is the highest guaranteed return available to a normal person. Think of it as taking your foot off the brake before you try to pick up speed. Once that anchor is gone, every dollar you send toward your investments finally gets to roll downhill instead of fighting just to stay in place. This is where 2026 matters, because the ground has shifted under savers in a way that fools a lot of people. Right now, the best high-yield savings accounts pay somewhere around 4%, while the average ordinary savings account pays about 1/3 of 1%. 4% sounds close enough to the stock market that plenty of people talk themselves into parking real wealth there and calling it done. But cash does not compound the way ownership does. Inflation this year has been running near 2.7%, and that quietly eats most of what a savings account hands you. The crossover math only works on money that is invested and genuinely growing, not money sitting still so you can feel safe at night. That single distinction is the whole game. The people who reach their number are almost never the ones with the fattest savings account. They are the ones who let their money own things that grow. Now set all of this against where most Americans actually stand, because the real figures are sobering. The typical household under 35 holds under $19,000 in retirement savings. By the mid-50s into the mid-60s, the median climbs to only about $185,000. Meanwhile, survey after survey keeps finding that people believe they need somewhere around $1.5 million to retire comfortably. That gap is frightening, and fear pushes people straight into the wrong move. They assume the only answer is to save even more brutally, to squeeze harder, to sacrifice a bigger piece of their present. For anyone still climbing toward their line, that instinct is exactly right, and you should honor it. But for the person who already crossed their line years ago and never noticed, most of that extra sacrifice is simply wasted. Dominic worked double shifts deep into his 60s, terrified he had not done enough, never once realizing his invested money had long ago passed the point where his own labor was the smaller half of the equation. He spent years buying a security he already owned. There is one more trap worth naming, because it quietly drags people back down the hill after they have climbed it. Crossing the line once does not mean you stay across it. If you're spending balloons every time your income does, your yearly savings target climbs right along with it. And remember what we said, a bigger saving habit pushes your crossover point higher. Someone who lets their lifestyle swell can technically uncross their own line, suddenly needing a much larger pile just to keep pace with the life they have inflated. The people who win this game tend to let their investments grow faster than their appetites do. They give themselves raises in freedom rather than only in stuff. And that one choice is often the difference between reaching the line early and chasing it forever. Let me make the reward concrete, because breathing room stays abstract until you put a number on it. On the far side of your line, a market averaging 7% hands a person with $300,000 invested around $21,000 in a typical year, quietly in the background, while they sleep and work and live their life. That is a second income you never have to clock in for. It does not mean you quit everything and lie on a beach forever. It means the pressure changes shape. You can absorb a surprise expense without spiraling. Walking away from a toxic boss becomes an actual option because your money is no longer standing on the edge of a cliff. You get to say yes to the thing that matters and no to the overtime that does not. That is what the line actually buys you. Not a yacht, but options, and options are the truest form of wealth that most people never think to budget for. So the real message here is not that saving suddenly stops mattering. It is that your effort and your money trade places at a specific, findable moment, and knowing when that moment arrives should change what you do with your one life. Before the line, be relentless. Feed the account, ignore the painfully slow start, and get yourself across by any honest means you can. After the line, you have earned the right to breathe. You can take the job that pays a little less but leaves you a lot more alive at the end of the day. You can stop grading your own worth by how much you denied yourself this month. The frantic chapter has an expiration date, and the quiet tragedy is that most people keep grinding for years after it passes, purely because no one ever told them the line was there. Now you know how to find yours. Run the math tonight. Your yearly investing divided by 7% is the number that changes everything about how hard you truly have to push. And if this is landing for you, the natural next step is understanding the money rules that would have carried you here years faster. The kind of plain lessons that somehow never got taught in a single classroom. That is exactly what I walked through in my breakdown of the money lessons schools never taught, and it sits right alongside everything you just learned about your number. Before you head out, I really do want to hear from you down in the comments. Where are you standing on this journey right now? Honestly, are you still grinding toward that first 100,000? Or have you already felt that strange, quiet moment when your money started out earning you? Tell me the number you are chasing, the lesson you had to learn the hard way, and the one habit that moved the needle most in your life. I read these, and your story might be the exact push that keeps the next person from quitting right before their snowball starts to roll.